Welcome to a show about learning technologies so powerful they transcend the boundaries of reality itself. I'm your host, Pinky Gonzalez, and this is New School VR. Okay, we are live-ish.
Fantastic. It's great to be here. How are you, Pinky?
I'm doing great. This is Shawn Daley at Concordia University.
It's a pleasure. I think that we're thrilled to start this podcast here at the Concordia recording studio. We're happy to be talking about virtual reality and what its future is in the higher ed space. So thank you for taking the time to have us and to be part of this conversation.
Well, it's an honor to have you, honestly, Shawn. I'm not sure that this show would even exist in the form that it now does if it weren't for a conversation that you and I had just a few short weeks ago.
Well, I think that we're encouraged by the fact that we can be partners with a lot of people in this VR, AR space, but also that we have a chance to be able to leverage the studio and the resources that we have for community benefit. Our university has had a long history of trying to support members of the community, and so we hope that other people like yourself will take advantage of our desire to be a partner in developing new ways of approaching education, technology, business. I have a feeling that the next couple of years are going to require a lot more collaboration and cooperation than they ever had before.
Could not agree more. To that end, you and I met when you reached out to a studio I'm a proud partner of, the Dash production team here in Portland, Oregon. VR is one of the things that we specialize in, more in marketing and activation context. But you were reaching out to bring members of the Portland VR and tech community together in the first place, and that was the impetus for our initial meeting. Tell us a little bit about what you want to do with the community on behalf of the university and beyond.
I've been an observer of the AR, VR ecosystem here in Portland for a while now. I had leveraged AR for some projects that I had gotten grant funding for 3 years back. And admittedly, I thought it was sort of a niche technology initially, but then to sort of watch how this community as a whole, how Portland has integrated it into its fiber, has been remarkable. And so when I reached out to Dash, which, by the way, you have a wonderful facility over there in Southeast Portland, and some of the experiences that Dash have conjured, for those of you who have not gone online and taken a look at some of their videos, it's pretty phenomenal stuff. You had me painting in a virtual space, got to paint a version of myself. And, you have those experiences and you see a wide array of possibilities for the use of VR and AR when it comes to education, business. And so part of my desire to go around and have these conversations has been, how do we have a collective moment to be able to think about how this could revolutionize the way that the classroom works, the way the business works, and how do we work together to be able to bring that to reality? And so I've been tickled by how easily people have been willing to let me into these conversations. I think that they know that there is a lot of potential for cross-pollination between education, and in my case, higher ed, and the business and technology sectors. So that conversation was one of several fantastic chats I've had about where these two places intersect.
3 years ago, you were applying for and receiving grants for this sort of technology. Where was your head, and what did you end up doing with that funding?
When we applied for the initial grant, it was for a small seed grant for a project with a group of middle school students, and all that we had put in the grant was multimedia. And so the grant was about working with a part of Portland called Vanport. And Vanport used to be a city. It was flooded away in 1948. And my partner and I had taken a group of students to the old Vanport site, which, if you ever go there, there's nothing remaining of Vanport. And the kids really were bored to tears because there was nothing for them to look at. And so Matt had just done a virtual reality, augmented reality project in my educational technology class, and he suggested, well, what if we used AR to make Vanport reappear? Like, what if we had kids be able to hold up their phones and be able to see historical places? And that just struck me as, well, why couldn't we do that? Like, that'd be actually fantastic because my background's in history, and as a historian, there are so many places where important things happen that you wouldn't even know it. I mean, how many times have you walked around and you see some plaque that's like hidden off in the corner saying, in this spot, Jimi Hendrix played a tune, and you're like, whoa, like, how come that's not more present? I mean, what if you were able to hold up your phone and there was Jimi Hendrix on the corner just riffing on the guitar, because that's where he had done it in 1969. And so I thought Matt's concept was fantastic, and so we brought it through almost completely to reality. And it was the conversation that started here in the town. We had a great Oregonian article. We had some fantastic follow-up that really made me think about the educational potential of AR and what are the other use cases. And the granting organization, the National Council for the Social Studies and the Fund for the Advancement of Social Studies, was quite intrigued by what we had done, put us on a series of webinars, connected us to educators around the country. It also convinced me in my own research to want to pursue what are the affordances of virtual and augmented reality in the education space. And that's a lot of what I spend my time looking at.
That is incredible. So you say it came almost to reality. Did the project actually launch?
It didn't. And actually, it's an interesting story which sort of talks about the business potential of AR. We were using an app called Genio, which was owned by a company called Mateo, which was in Germany. And partway through our project, Apple decided to buy Mateo. And when Apple bought Mateo, Mateo sent us an email saying all projects that are on our program will be unable to be accessed after December of this particular year. And so we had gotten far enough into it that that had been our place, and the grant was not going to allow us to get more money to be able to take it off and to be able to do it someplace else. Matt's grad assistantship was ending, so we had a wonderful time exploring what the possibility could have been. And if anyone's out there who'd like to fund us to be able to finish it, we're happy to go back and do that work. But that didn't complete. The good news in my mind was that a company like Apple was moving into the AR space where really they hadn't been up until that particular point. And it was when I saw them do that it really cemented for me, like, wow, this technology is becoming something that the powers that be really believe can move.
Man, that is incredible, and speaks to some of the pitfalls of working with third parties that may not be open source or always available. Do any of the assets from that project still exist, or would you have to start completely from scratch to get it back on the road?
We still have a number of the assets. Matt had done a lot of 360 photography. We had pulled a lot of materials from the Oregon Historical Society, so it's still a viable project. It'd be a question of just time. I think that we had gotten so far into using that one particular program that, and this is partly some of the vagaries of how we work at a university. Grad assistantships run out. Jobs change. I moved from being a professor of education solely to doing an administrative role for the university. So there are a bunch of projects that are over on the side that I think that if I ever get a sabbatical again, I'd be able to go and finish, especially with my awareness of what's out there in terms of the programs and materials. Although I would say that having played with some of the more recent tech that's come out, what we were planning was still sort of low compared to what you can now do 2.5 years later.
Were there any Pokemon running around on version 1.0?
No Pokemon. I think that I think some of the 8th graders would have really loved that, actually, if we could have had Pokemon appear between some of the houses that were flooding away. That would probably make it less depressing as a story. But at the same time, that the Pokemon scenario, and we've talked about this in higher ed. Some people absolutely hate that was the thing that sparked people's imagination this summer. But I absolutely loved that it was getting people outside, walking around, being with their parents, showing the communal health and technological potential. I mean, I don't know many other apps that got people moving in Unity, where I saw a parent and child maneuvering around campus. like with Pokemon. So, interesting to think about how that app has done more for us in the ed space to really think about the potential of AR than a lot of the projects that other people have been working on. I mean, there are great geotagged AR projects that Wisconsin-Madison and Harvard and MIT did, but nothing gained traction like Pokemon suddenly being able to really hit the ball out of the park this past summer.
Yeah, totally agree. I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that Yelp has had a form of AR built in for years now, where you can point it up or point it down the street and it'll tell you what businesses are there. And it was just sort of one of those tricks that were perhaps interesting but not transformative. And here we are finally grasping its potential. I'd like to talk a little bit more about not only your role here at Concordia, but also your personal interest in history and social studies. You're hitting on those issues already, but technology, history, social studies, and the virtual and augmented arts, where do those things come together now, and where do you see them going in the future?
So I was a high school history teacher for 10 years, and part of the rationale for where I see tech and social studies intersecting came out of my pedagogy, which initially, when I started teaching, I remember joking with students that I was going to be like the anti-technology teacher, that we didn't really need it. And then after 2 weeks of putting kids to sleep, I changed my tone and started trying to figure out ways to incorporate the technology because it energized them in a way that even me on my best day wasn't able to. And then on top of that, when I went back and did my master's in history, I found that there were a lot of opportunities for digital history, for spatial history, that would only become better if we were operating with the technological tools that were out there. And so for me, whenever I've taught history, I think that I've tried to look at the affordances of different types of technology to either improve people's accessing content or to improve people's experience in a classroom or on their own learning with these particular tools. And when it comes to augmented and virtual reality, I think that I've talked to a lot of K-12 educators who can see a lot of the potential in this particular space. I mean, I've watched second graders who would have done what normally would be a stolid project where they have a report about somebody from history, and there they've gone and made a video of Susan B. Anthony or Eleanor Roosevelt, and when you scan the front page of their paper, that comes to life and this person starts to talk. Or I've seen science fairs where kids have chronicled all of the procedures they've done on their project. And again, instead of just having a trifold display, yeah, it's fascinating, but doesn't really go in depth, you're able to whip out some tool, goggles or phone, and be able to get into their head or get into the experience and to be able to see that stuff in real time. And notice here, I'm not talking about a student's passive experience of learning, but how they create in these particular spaces and with these tools. And so for me, a lot of this is not just how do I get kids to put on a pair of goggles and go back to Gettysburg and watch the Confederates charge over a field, but how do I get them to use these tools to make stuff? And how do I help them be able to leverage these opportunities to improve upon what's going on in the education space or in their classrooms, and to even themselves think of what the potential could be in different fields as they head off into higher ed and then beyond.
That's incredible. I think the act of creating in the learning process is perhaps one of the most overlooked in the history of the classroom experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, I read a lot about how there are some excellent teachers, and I like to focus on them who you can follow on Twitter, like Brad Wade, who I think does AR all the time. I'm trying to remember his Twitter. I can make it available for the follow-up. But there are some people who've done some amazing work around the country with giving kids the opportunity to work with these particular tools. I'm always amazed by the teachers who don't, and I know that some of them it's scary, but AR has been great and VR have been great recently because companies have made their accessibility so easy. I mean, yeah, it wouldn't be cheap to buy a PlayStation VR set for many teachers, but at the same time, we're not talking like $1 million investment. We're talking a couple hundred to maybe $1,000 tops. And schools, if they were thoughtful about their resources and sharing resources, could make these available to their entire student population and then allow these kids to create. And I think that one of my objectives in my role supporting our College of Education is how do I prepare teachers who know how to do this to be able to bring it to their schools. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing recently here at Concordia. We have a program called 3 to PhD, which we're trying to build a school of education inside a public K-8 school. And my role in that team is to develop STEAM learning, or science, technology, education, arts, and math. And I have a dream that I will be creating educators who don't just have a mindset for doing STEAM work, but who are able to go around the country and implement STEAM practices and pedagogies for the 21st century, and then hopefully influence their schools, districts, and communities to be able to do the same. And we've had a lot of success doing that. I have a lot of great graduates who I follow on Facebook and Twitter, and they're still experimenting with these tools. And so I like to think that it's been working so far.
Where can a teacher start today if they want to take this plunge?
The easiest app, and I know some people will guffaw, has always been Erasmus. Erasmus has done a wonderful job of recognizing that the educational community started to use it. I think they were surprised by that. I remember reading the articles saying, "Oh, whoa, look at this! Teachers are using our app." And I don't know if they've advanced so far, but at the same time, if you're a teacher, you could pick up Erasmus, you could put it on your phone, and you could do a version of AR really, really quickly. And so I usually tell people to see if you could start with that, and because people like Brad Wade have put books and guides out there to be able to use. If you're a one-to-one iPad school or a one-to-one Chromebook school, there are those tools that would make it really easy for you to be able to do that with your students. When it comes to virtual reality, I really have been captivated by the Eon experience. Eon has provided a framework online for you to leverage a lot of their already built stuff to be able to make lessons centered around virtual reality experiences. And that goes from wide-ranging areas to could you tour this area in Egypt, to can you look at this part of the body, to could you be able to play in a fantastical world. And so I think that a teacher could, with very minimal experience and a weekend of playing around, get to the place where they could try something with their students. And I think that I'm the type of educator who's always said, give it a whirl. You probably have maybe in a given month 10 great lessons, 5 good lessons, 4 mediocre lessons, and 3 or 4 terrible ones that the kids are just and you yourself are paying to get through those. Take one of those bad days and just try this and see if it would work. Don't change your best lesson, but if you could improve that terrible day that we all know you have, and I had them too, with VR and AR, what's the loss? Give it a whirl and see if it helps to get kids more engaged, because you may stoke their wonder and by doing so allow them to play in a space where there's still a lot of potential for growth and the need for their creativity and fresh set of eyes.
Stoke their wonder. I like that expression a lot. How about parents, Shawn? What can we do as parents at home, whether our schools are bleeding edge or way behind? How can we use this technology for education in the home?
Actually, you raise a great question there, Pinky, because there's a number of opportunities there. I think that parents need to be exposed to this. I've always been captivated by how easy something basic like a Google Cardboard could be. Now, I don't love Google Cardboard. I should be really clear about that I think it's clunky, and sometimes you get a bad lens that makes somebody not like VR, and so I'm always cautious about that. But I keep seeing the little glasses come out that you can attach to your phone. And if you bought 100 of those, they'd be like $4 each. And so if I'm a school, like, why wouldn't I invest in a bunch of those? Why wouldn't I invest in like a single, like a Ricoh Theta 360 camera? And even though it's not pure virtual reality, you could do an immersive experience. You could do something on the virtuality spectrum that would allow parents to be able to see, A, how cool this is, and maybe you get some good PR out of it for your school as well. I mean, I've seen a couple of universities tape a day in the life in 360, send the video out on their website, and then be able to give goggles to prospective students. And then these kids are walking through campus, experiencing class. I think a lot of parents are sick of the newsletter. And so if you wanted to change it up, it wouldn't take a lot to be able to do this. If you need expertise, then of course you can ask us here at Concordia University to be able to support you, because we know how to be able to do it. But there are a lot of people in various towns around the country who could make that happen. And that, I think, would expose parents to, whoa, this is just the basic level. And when I say basic, I'm not trying to insult those 360 filmmakers who do fantastic work, but I mean, it's the easiest to be able to access. And then if they can see that, maybe they'll want to play with AR. Maybe they'll want to play with holographic systems like HoloLens. Maybe they'll want to have their kids programming in Unity and demand that happens, because I think that's the revolution that as a university we want to encourage. I mean, it's great that our kids may have exposure to programming here, but really, I mean, I need kids coming into university experiences being able to know enough programming to move on. And I need people who've experienced modeling to be able to take the next step. I don't believe that universities can be the place where all of that happens, because it will just be too slow. So I think that part of what we want to do here at Concordia is, while we want to offer our own programming, part of my job has to be encouraging this along the pipeline. And I do work part-time at St. Mary's Academy in downtown Portland as a director of innovation, and that's exactly what we're talking about right now. Like, how do we get, in that case, girls in grades 9 through 12 programming all the way up to Unity, to be able to get to college and to be able to take those next steps in terms of creation and development.
That's fantastic. A couple of avenues I want to go down simultaneously, but I'll start with the simple one. There's some controversy about how young is too young for kids in VR. What's your perspective on when to start this sort of thing?
You know, the American Pediatric Association years back made a pretty drastic commentary about screen time. And I think they've pulled back a little bit, because now that they have a lot more data from years of kids playing with iPads and using Osmos and Osbots, they can recognize that in the right setting and with the right guidance, it's not that harmful. I mean, I don't want to ever encourage kids to spend like 12 hours on their TV. I'm a big fan, and not just lip service, but having read her, of Maria Montessori, and the need for kids to play and to make eggs and to go out and experience dirt. And people may laugh at that, but at the same time, I believe that that's valid. I also think that there's this push to like eliminate technology from the lives of kids ages 3 through 9, and I think that's a colossal mistake. Because I think that we've seen technology get to the point where the user experience is so simple that little kids are able to run with it really fast. And because that's an affordance, why wouldn't we try to work with kids on being able to get them equipped to really go farther than our imagination could possibly think of right now? So I would encourage parents to take thoughtful steps. I would say that I appreciate that we should not be asking our kids to spend 12 hours on a screen. But at the same time, I think with the proper guidance, if a kid is programming, if a kid is using that iPad to work with a robot, is learning the basics of code as one of several things that they do, I think that's a healthy blend for a lot of kids. I think that kids in 1st and 2nd grade should be learning Scratch and Scratch Junior if they could, to get those precepts down and then to be able to scale up as they age. But I see a lot of teachers who are very afraid of that because they're afraid of the wrath of parents. Right now, one of the things that we're working on is how do we have a community conversation about the proper integration of tech with young students. And I think that we're not there yet, but I think we'll get there soon.
Who needs to be in that conversation?
Well, I think that parents have to be a lot more aware of what's happening. I think that you're hearing me talk about this conversation around getting VR goggles into parents' hands, even for the sake of having a physical thing in front of them, and to have them ask the question, why is the school sending home this piece of technology? In my mind, either that's going to make them excited that they got free stuff, or it's going to make them angry enough to be able to come in and to ask questions. And that's an opportunity for the school not to be defensive, but to invite a conversation. I think that teachers can be leading this conversation. I think that business and technology sectors should support teachers to have this conversation as it's in their best interest. And you see a lot of skepticism right now about things like social media because no one really was seizing the helm with regards to who should have the conversation. It was like everybody was defaulting. Oh, it's not me. It's not me. But I actually have told the teachers I train, I'm like, it's you. Lead that conversation because right now there's a void. Parents don't know what the heck they're doing. And I remember hearing this from Amber Case at Lewis and Clark that we're all in adolescence when it comes to this particular piece of technology. What she doesn't say is that that's actually really scary if the people who are charged with being responsible and mentoring and guiding are also in their adolescence. I don't want to live in a world where everybody is 14. I think that there's a time where we have to grow up, recognize that some of this technology has been around for a while, and we have to lead those conversations. So in my mind, it's parents and teachers. I think it's business lending a hand to teachers and saying, here's how we can help you with that. We're going to let you run that conversation because parents trust you. And I think that the community can come together in a lot of venues to be able to make that work.
You're here. So, question for you about the other side of this spectrum. If VR and AR is the bleeding edge or the cutting edge, if teachers should be learning this stuff, if we're getting beyond adolescence and maturing in our thinking and usage and integration of these technologies in the classroom from the start, we have the same number of hours in the day as we always have. What are the technologies that are on their way out that this can better serve us with?
I think that we have to think about right now, how some of our current technologies are evolving. A bunch of teachers will chuckle at me, but there was a rage for a while around these things called smart boards or smart displays that that had their moment, and they're out. I'm torn about laptops. I'm torn about desktops. I think we'll always use those, but I think their use cases are going to be very different, particularly as people go far more mobile. I've done this activity that one of my students taught me where I asked kids in the class to hold up the finger that they use to dial the phone. And if you do that in a mixed room, you get a lot of people who are in Gen X or boomers who hold up their pointer finger. You hold it up with kids and they hold up their thumb. And it's always intriguing to me to see how, even from a certain evolutionary perspective, we've evolved in a short period of time from where we were learning QWERTY keyboard typing to people who can type full papers with their thumbs. And for some people that's scary, and for me that's just a natural evolution, since nothing in the state of nature says that we type QWERTY just based on how we were built. We learn that behavior, and we're learning new behaviors. I don't think that we're going to say goodbye to laptops, but I can imagine a world of extremely powerful tablets that allow us the affordances of natural movement with our hands. I'm looking at companies like Wacom and where they're being able to develop some tools for the classroom that we haven't had before. I wonder about the fabrication movement. I actually am not a booster for 3D printing in the classroom. I'm not against it, but it's so far from actually being pedagogically sound that I actually caution a lot of schools against it and think those are things that should exist in lab spaces and hacker spaces. So I'm not anti that. I'm intrigued to see where drones go, and robots. I worry about some of the cutesy robots that appear. I feel like there's this new market in like STEM toys, which some are good, but a lot are bad. And I have to caution parents to really look at what they're paying $300 for, and is it something that will actually help them learn? My friend Dave is an engineer at Embry-Riddle University, and he sort of jokes that the best thing to be able to get to kids sometimes is just a basic drafting kit, because that's actually going to teach them a lot more than some of these bots that appear on Amazon. So I know I'm sort of bouncing around your question here. I mean, there's the wide world of technology. I think that while there's a lot of stuff that is on this cutting edge, and I don't know if anything's going to die. I think that we're going to see things evolve. I mean, look at how certain laptops have evolved to these touchscreen Surface combos as a result of the fact that people expect their laptops to have touchscreens. And I can't tell you how many times I brought my MacBook Pro to a meeting, and a very intelligent person with a PhD next to me has tried to touch the screen to make it change, and I have to remind them that Apple hasn't ever made that functionality on their computer. And they'll turn and say, well, why not? And I'm like, I can't speak for Apple. I don't know why they wouldn't do that. But I mean, the fact that even those folks are sort of demanding an evolution in laptop technology says to me that some of the things that we've gotten very comfortable with may evolve out of here, because we're just not going to be using them the same way that we used to. And I think that as my daughter, who's 14, grows into an adult, I wonder, if her home will have a desktop computer or a laptop, or she'll just have a really sensational phone on which she'll be doing her papers and her work.
I had a similar experience earlier this week. I have a 3-year-old, and she and I were watching a video of an older gentleman, probably pushing 90, experiencing VR with his son for the very first time, and he had to call his daughter to tell her about this experience, and he had a flip phone to call her on, and a little 3-year-old Sienna had never seen such a thing. So she asked me, "What is that?" Like, wow, a flip phone is ancient technology now. It's just amazing.
Well, we live in a world where, the kids who are young today, like my daughter is 7, and she doesn't know a world that doesn't have an iPhone. And if you don't have any reference point to some of these older technologies, I think that you would just be confused as to why people are so attached. One thing that is pretty remarkable is the rapidity with which a lot of this technology changes. And I think that's what threatens a lot of the older generation, is that they had nothing like this. I don't remember any of these technological breakthroughs in the 80s or early 90s. It was slow. I remember text-based email throughout college, and all of a sudden it gets better and better and better, quicker and quicker. And so to go from a relatively slow pace where I still remember black and white TV was it, to now we can have multiple streams of color, and we're existing in fantastical worlds through VR. It's changed fast, and I think that our younger generation will help push that, because that's what they expect. They have no expectation of slowing down. They assume that companies will be getting better and better with this stuff. And with VR and AR, as you know, Pinky, we're going to move past that phase where putting on the headset's the cool thing, to, hey, this experience I'm having isn't that awesome compared to this last one I had. I was able to be in the digestive tract, and I want to be in a better digestive tract. We're going to start getting these demands to have a lot more realistic experiences, because the basic experience of the hardware is going to wear off, and kids especially, and I'm glad we spent a lot of time talking about that, they're not going to be patient in the way that I think our older generation is still sort of wowed by a viewfinder VR experience.
Agreed. Any thoughts about what we're missing right now that is needed or would be useful?
I'm going to ask you to clarify there for a second. That the older generation is missing, that our generation's missing?
No, I would say more in terms of, as you put it, it's getting faster and faster. There's more and more experiences. They're getting better and better. The hardware is so new now. As of this recording, it's only a few months old in terms of its availability in the market. Therefore, there's not that much content out there, certainly compared to what there will be. It's an infinite number of things that will ultimately be created. Do you know of a need? Do you feel like there's a tool, there's something that teachers could really use if such a thing existed? What should we be building as developers in the industry?
There are a couple of programs that are out there right now that have not gotten completely to prime time, and I think that I see a lot of potential in their use cases in education. So, I was introduced to something called Immersion, Mursion, which for people who are in my specific field, which is teacher preparation, looks like it has a lot of opportunity. And really what Immersion is it puts teacher prep candidates or people who are trained to become teachers into simulated environments where they would have to deal with, say, a difficult student or a parent-teacher conference or a principal-teacher conference, and allows them to have a true simulation experience that the rest of the class can then watch them interacting. So you have to imagine the scenario where, like, you put on the headset, the simulation begins, you have to interact with the students, whereas this is happening on a screen somewhere else in the room, and the rest of the class is watching it take place. I think that the benefit of that is that, people would say, well, you could just do that by having the teacher act out the role, and that's true. But, the teacher then has to play multiple positions. They have to do the simulation. They have to talk about it afterwards. Whereas in this, we allow the unpredictability of the VR sim to be able to push that student and push students in different ways where all of them could have various experiences. And then the professor, me, gets the chance to guide them through it and not have to be in it. And so by having that detached guide role, I'm able to accelerate the learning of people who are going through that particular process. And if I were to go into all of the content areas, I think that, what a way to be able to have kids have an alternative experience of Shakespeare, to not just read Hamlet, but to be one of the side players. Imagine if you took on the role of Ophelia, and there you were in the court watching your brother argue with Hamlet. To be in science, the affordance of just being able to shrink down. I can't go into a beating heart unless I'm a surgeon, in which case it's a highly dangerous thing to do. Whereas with VR, I'm able to put a kid into the human circulatory system as it is pumping and almost create it in real time with real dimensions. I'm able to possibly infect it or affect it to the way that kids can see the problems with buildup and blockage and what you do to yourself. The same goes for, I think of kids who I used to teach who were in our automotive program when I taught at Gresham High School, who I think would leave their experience of mechanics being able to understand how engines work in a way that they never were able to before because, as the joke usually goes, you can't put your head in a functioning engine, but with a hologram, you could. And so all of these to me are motions or moments that I think that we should, as an AR/VR community, think really, optimistically about how we could change the learning experience for kids. There's a company that talks a lot about knowledge transfer being the future, and I agree with that. I think that AR and VR will facilitate knowledge transfer in a way that teachers and educators and business people should be saying, this is the way, the truth, the life, and just move to be able to make those happen. Not to replace the classroom. And I don't want to give the impression that I think that school should be blown up and no one should go there again. I'm not going to get into in this podcast why I think there's a wonderful social experience of school that's important learning, but I think that we can enliven and enrich the school experience so much through these technologies that really are not as expensive anymore as they used to be. You saw yesterday that Vive has a version now that's tetherless, and if that's going with the speed with which it's happening, I can only imagine that within a couple of years that this gets past the beta phase for schools and actually can be something that they implement. And I think that teachers should be ready.
You bring up a couple more great points there. To the tetherless issue, it's obvious to anybody who's used the high-end hardware currently available that the cord stuck to the back of your brain is the first thing that's got to go. And it was fascinating to watch the conversation on Reddit around this. How many people who are Vive owners, so these are going to be your first adopters and your gamers, the people that are really spending money on hardware. How many of those people were genuinely surprised at how fast we got to this thing? Now, granted, nobody's used this particular one yet, so jury's still out, but fingers are firmly crossed that technology is going to be legit and widely available and less expensive by the second. You also brought up the point about simulation, and Concordia has a deep history in simulating bad things. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do with the Department of Homeland Security and how that might inform where VR and AR go from here?
Yeah, we've had a lot of success with simulation in the past. And I should be really clear that simulation can exist without technology. And so and our Center for Homeland Security has been really good about being able to think about both leveraging the tech and not leveraging the tech. And so, my friend Rick Huffman, who runs our simulator, is able to really easily bring in a group of people from, say, a fire department or a school district and put them through simulation scenarios, including even using the room that we're in now to simulate news announcements. Or we've had a fake president of the United States in this studio announcing that a major bio disaster has happened, and in other rooms in this building, Rick and other professors will run people through. Okay, well, what will you do? And those simulations exist on the first floor of just Rick and Scott acting as folks pushing people through a lot of scenarios. But then we also have a massive simulator machine that was built by Adams, ADMS, that actually puts people in front of a gigantic movie screen and several other screens, and they have to navigate through scenarios. It's joystick-based, so it's not a full immersive in the way that you'd put on a set of goggles, but at the same time, when you're sitting at the command helm in front of this gigantic screen, there you are trying to direct traffic or trying to direct the fire department or trying to find a bomb or trying to take out an active shooter. And we find that those particular processes are really important. And it speaks to the nature just of simulation, Pinky. When I was a high school teacher, we used simulation because it gets people thinking about what would it be like to be in those moments. Scott Weiniger, who's our VP for security, used to run the Homeland Security program. He would say that the reason that you do an active shooter scenario, as depressing as it is so that you know the movements that you would go through to be able to be ready in that awful moment that somebody opened fire at a church or a school or a movie theater. And so it's training the mind. And that, I think, should speak to all of us with regards to what is the potential of all simulation and immersive experiences. The reason that I think that surgeons should love simulation is because they're training their brain to be, and medicine knows this. If you go to Oregon Health Sciences University, there's a laparoscopic surgery VR station. And the purpose is just, hey, this is really difficult surgery to do. You won't be able to practice it very often. And so if we can get you doing it here so that your mind has a sense of what to do, then you will hopefully do better so you don't kill somebody or get someone hurt. And our folks here they know that from a pedagogical perspective. They leverage the technology when necessary or when available to be able to help enhance that experience. And I know that Rick and I have had conversations frequently about, hey, how do we, again, build upon what we already do to be able to have additional AR and VR experiences? And that's even where I became aware of immersion was, how do we make that happen, not just for Homeland Security, but in a variety of other contexts? So I think that we're, as a university, and we're a teaching university, persistently looking for how to improve the teaching process so that our people have real in-depth experiences of what they want to do in key situations.
Fantastic. So we've covered a lot of ground, and as the first interview for the show, I think this is a pretty incredible foundation to build on. What are some of the resources that have been helpful to you as you've learned your way through all that's going on in technology right now?
I think that for me, as I was prepping for where the university was going to go, I looked at an article that's very popular, and I'm going to butcher the name, but it's I think Milgram and Koshino from 1994 talked about the virtuality continuum and all of these different phases of immersion and immersive learning. And I think that makes the backbone of a lot of the academic look at what's out there. I find that as I talk to people in the city of Portland, there's some interesting dynamics when it comes to what counts. And AR doesn't count and VR doesn't count. And there's this thing called MR that sort of counts, and there's holograms. And I think that number one is looking at that continuum made me think of all of these as an integrated whole. Like there's a lot of different flavors of it, but they're all pushing towards the same thing. We are trying to train the mind to immerse itself in other worlds, the same way that we actually would with a book or with a really good television show. But we're trying to be able to connect with a different space to be able to foster empathy. I think a lot about what I think is valuable with AR and VR, and it's the potential for teaching people how to think like somebody else or how to be in someone else's shoes realistically. To that particular end, we had Dr. Christopher Deedy from Harvard University here, and Dr. Deedy has done a lot of work in 20 years on where immersive learning can really have potential. And I think that some of his readings are some of the more accessible for people who are not familiar with this. And so I'd encourage you to take a look at some of his more recent stuff. And then I also find that one of my mentors at Michigan State University, Dr. John Bell, looks at social presence and embodied content and how AR and VR can really help with the learning process. And so I have to give him kudos because he sort of pushed me to contemplate what are the opportunities here in this particular space. And so all of those have been very influential to me. I mean, I look at the people in town who are doing this not from an academic bent, but from a business bent. I like to follow people on Twitter. Paul Reynolds, is a fantastic resource. If you haven't seen it, his mapping of the Portland VR ecosystem really tells you about how far this has expanded. I have my thought partners at Oregon Storyboard, Shelley Midthun, Nick Lambert, Anthony Pires. Anthony's been fantastic about thinking about this from a curricular standpoint. I think that people like you, Pinky, who like me, are looking at this from a really, I think, in-depth, not just education, but wider use case opportunity. I remember a very initial experience. I had augmented a picture and showed it to one of my friends who's a chemistry professor, and his response was, "So what?" And I paused for a second, and I said, "Don't you understand the pedagogical opportunities?" And he said, "No." I think that actually pushed me to sort of say I need to be really abundant and consistently ideating and iterating as many ideas about how to use this tech as possible. And some of those authors I just referenced and those people I just referenced have been great about trying to imagine new worlds. And so look for people who are doing that, who don't stop at just the one use case, but who are consistently saying, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this?
I love it. We're running out of time, but in the in honor of one of my podcasting heroes, Kent Bai, who has the Voices of VR podcast, one of the most influential in the industry, and certainly has informed my thinking and approach to this show. I love his question at the end of every show. Anything left unsaid?
Well, yeah, it's actually a very, very deep question to contemplate, and we've talked about a lot today. When you talked before about kids, I couldn't help but think about my daughter Nora, who's 7, who I put a headset on, and she was in a virtual aquarium. This past week we had the presidential election, and I think about the need for empathy on both sides of the aisle. And I go back to that comment before about how augmented and virtual reality have the potential for helping us to access what it means to be in somebody else's shoes, to see a day in their life. And whether it's MR holograms or 360 photos, I would really encourage the community right now to think about, are there ways that we could really teach about empathy and experience? Maybe if people from one side of the aisle had been able to experience life in the Midwest and some of the difficulties people faced when it came to unemployment and joblessness, they would understand some of what happened this past election day. And conversely, if you had an experience of putting someone in the lives of a minority or an immigrant, then maybe they would have understood why there was such a threat to the other side of the aisle. So I think right now, I would encourage those who are out there in the developer community, but in the education community too. This could be a great opportunity for us to be able to teach empathy in all fields. And if we have the technology at our disposal, why wouldn't we do it?
Thank you, Shawn Daley, Concordia University Chief Innovation Officer, inspirer of this show and our first interview. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Pinky. Pleasure to be here.
New School VR is graciously supported by and recorded live at Concordia University in beautiful Portland, Oregon. For over 100 years, Concordia has been preparing teachers and learning professionals for life and for a living. For more information, visit cu-portland.edu. And by ... an experiential design and technology studio specializing in custom virtual reality and experiential marketing activations that incite wonder and inspire action. See more at ... .io. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes or through your favorite podcast delivery app. Visit us online at newschoolvr.com, and thanks for listening. I'm your host, Pinky Gonzalez, and this is New School VR.
This VR podcast is dope.